Well, let me get started here. All right, the meaning of nativity, part one of four parts. Anybody familiar with Advent knows that the first theme of Advent is hope. So that's what we're going to look at today. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here to this image. Now, many of you know that my big transformative moment occurred when I visited a exhibition of the Barnes Foundation collection in Philadelphia, but it was at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, not at the traditional location in Marion, Pennsylvania, very controversial exhibit. And when I was there, I was blown away, of course, by all the Renoirs I saw, all the Monets I saw. Even Henri Matisse work startled me in a very good way, I'd say, a life-expanding way. Matisse, as you know, is not a literalist when it comes to depicting his subjects. He paints his subjects in a rough, almost crudely simplistic way with seemingly arbitrary colors. So, how did non literal art like this have such a profound effect on me? Well, I was a religious conservative traditionalist at the time. When I experienced this exhibit, I thought to myself, could visual art possibly be as revelatory as scripture? At least that was my thinking then, and did not require a literal approach as I was being taught at the time. Well, flash forward after a further reflection about my experience, that exhibit taught me a great truth about art, that artists must often lie in order to tell the truth. Obviously, for Matisse, the feeling one has, the experience one has when looking at the seated Riffian is more important than what the Riffian actually looked like. So I wondered that maybe if I stop trying to be so literal, I'll expand my understanding and perhaps become a little wiser. Here's how I see things today. And allow me to use an arboreal analogy. Some of you may have heard this before. Truths of any faith or spiritual tradition, even a philosophical tradition, are like a fruit-bearing tree, like the tree in this Barnes Foundation painting. The original seed that created these fruit-bearing trees, the founder of whatever spiritual philosophical tradition I'm equating with that seed, is not necessarily the important thing. It's the tree itself, the quality of its fruit, the pleasure it brings to our eyes, the type of experience it offers. This, not the seed, is what really matters. Now, that may sound pretty radical to some of us who maybe have a more traditional view of things, but please stick with me. When I was in seminary, I learned about the quest for the historical Jesus. A group of academics thought that if they could just discover the facts about the historical founder of the Christian faith, then they would be able to offer the, and I put this in quotes, true version of the faith. Well, here's what ultimately happened. Not much consensus was reached among these academics when they were searching out the founder's biography. In fact, these academics simply found the Jesus that already conformed to their own idiosyncratic values and beliefs. Now, I believe that the quest for the historical Jesus or the historical founder of any religious tradition or philosophical tradition is like hacking at the base of the tree of that faith and its traditions and trying to find the original seed, which is the founder. But let me ask you, wouldn't our time be better spent focused on the tree itself? Asking questions like, is it fully healthy? Do all the branches produce good fruit? Are some of the branches dying and do they need pruning? Is the tree's beauty even worth our attention? And finally, do we have a role to play in nurturing the tree to become more fruitful, more beautiful? Well, this is how art has transformed my perception of truth. My experience of art led me to focus more on the tree of my spiritual and philosophical traditions, rather than spend all my time trying to find the historical seed from which it all sprouted. Now, let me offer this caveat. I do believe there's a place for seeking the historical origins of our traditions. I'm not going to throw out the baby with the bathwater, but that search for the founder should not dominate our time and attention. It should not override our attention on the quality of fruit of that tradition. And that leads me to discuss nativity sets. How's that for a segue? Now, when I was growing up, the most exciting day after Thanksgiving was when our nativity set was taken out of storage and placed on the table, handcrafted by my great-grandfather. Now, my mother made the nativity set you're looking at right now in her ceramic class. I apologize for the quality of the photo. She sent it to me yesterday from her phone. But in this, you'll get the idea. We have Joseph, Mary, and the baby, Jesus dead center, wise men on the left, shepherds on the right. The donkey and ox, of course, are present, along with some camels. How many of you put out a nativity set every year at Christmas time? Well, when I was young, I would like to imagine myself as various characters in the nativity scene. That made it more exciting to me. Even the shepherds were interesting, the humble shepherds, maybe because I related to them more, since I liked roaming the fields near my home. And that's what shepherds did all day long. Well, somewhere along the way, probably during my teenage years, I lost that interest in imagining myself in the scene, my felicity for imagination. And the nativity became a holiday decoration more than anything else. Did the same thing happen to you as you aged? Did Christmas lose some of its magic? Well, I hope not, or at least I hope you're getting some of that magic back. Nativity scenes are some of the earliest artistic depictions of the Christian tradition. Possibly the earliest nativity scene is this relief from a sarcophagus dated to the 4th century. Only the baby Jesus, the donkey, and the ox are present. Now, this one has a couple of birds as bookends. And here is what that early nativity scene developed into. Well, one thing I didn't realize when I was young was that most nativity scenes, like this one, were lying to me. If I really wanted the literal truth, the shepherds and wise men were not there at the same time. And many nativity sets present the wise men as actual kings. That isn't in the original story. The Gospels of Matthew and Luke never mentioned even a stable or a cave, which is where most nativity scenes place Mary and Joseph. And there is no mention in these texts of an ox and a donkey present, which are in every nativity scene you'll see. So from its earliest days, lies, I tell you, all lies. But after decades of pondering these matters, and after my dramatic experience viewing the Barnes collection, I think I've wizened up a bit. Perhaps the artist who created the first nativity scenes had to lie in order to tell a greater truth about this particular spiritual path. Such artistic license in nativity scenes conveys a greater truth about the story than any attempt at a literal, historically accurate reconstruction. And that brings me to a famous nativity scene, the nativity scene that we're going to focus on. Now, the first time I saw it was here, the National Gallery in London. I don't know about you, but it's always exciting for me when I can visit a place that holds a work of art that I have only admired from picture books. And that happened to me 2.5 years ago when I visited the National Gallery for the first time and was able to stand across from this work. At first, you may recognize some of its details from holiday cards, ornaments, coffee mugs, and the like. But when you look at the whole work and really take time to see it, you notice how strange it is. Mystic Nativity, as it is called, is by the Renaissance great Sandro Botticelli. He almost certainly did not give the work this name. Here's something else interesting about it. It is the only surviving work of Botticelli's that he ever signed. Ever signed. Obviously, this work had great personal significance for him. He also painted this on canvas, not the usual wooden panel he used for all his other paintings. Canvas, you see, can be rolled up and hidden away. So this painting was more than likely a private devotional work and most likely his own, never meant for public eyes. Why do you think that is? What secrets does it hold that Botticelli feared to expose? Now, I know most of you have heard of Sandro Botticelli, and when you think of him, I'm sure your first thoughts go to his most famous works, like The Birth of Venus, one of the most prized works in the collection of the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, Italy. I'd like you to take a moment to notice Botticelli's style of painting in this work. Now, when you think of Botticelli, you may also think of this work, Primavera, also featuring Venus, along with other figures from classical Greek and Roman mythology. Botticelli, for the first half of his artistic career, was known for creating art inspired by humanism, the celebration of the classical world and its capacity to inspire human flourishing, its exaltation of the ideals of beauty and form. This may also come as a surprise. After his death, Botticelli was forgotten among art collectors for nearly 300 years, and so were his Venuses. The only people who continued to pay any attention to Botticelli after his death were academics specializing in art history. And ironically, it was this nativity that brought about the rediscovery of Botticelli and the rediscovery of his Venuses. English collector William Fuller Maitland, at some time during the middle of the 19th century, purchased Mystic Nativity. And in 1857, he loaned it to an art treasures exhibition in Manchester, England. Around 1.3 million visitors saw it. It was a huge hit. Botticelli had been reborn, and from a nativity scene, no less. And he caused a new British invasion 100 years before the Beatles, an invasion of art-loving British going to Florence, Italy. And from that invasion came the rebirth of The Birth of Venus. And in 1878, the National Gallery of London purchased Mystic Nativity from Maitland's estate, where it has been on display for eager eyes to see ever since. Now that you've been reminded of Primavera and the Birth of Venus, you may notice that Botticelli's style is different in Mystic Nativity. Less detailed and polished, more indebted to orthodox iconography than classic Renaissance works. An orthodox nativity like this one. Here too we have our golden sky with angels. And we have the same less literal depiction of people. This work is not a celebration of beauty, but of spiritual ideas through its rich symbolism. So, what caused Botticelli's style to change from a celebration of the ideal of beauty to works less detailed and full of symbolism? Well, turns out it was most likely from a religious conversion inspired by the preaching of this man, the radical friar Girolamo Savonarola. Savonarola took Florence by storm in the last decade of the 15th century. He preached of the coming apocalypse where Florence would experience the wrath of God unless the city and all its people repented of its sinful ways. It's very likely Sandro Botticelli, along with his brother, got caught up in the religious fervor. Savonarola called for a bonfire of the vanities in which people would burn in the city square all of their fine jewelry, fine silks and furs, mirrors, other luxuries, along with their pagan artworks. Botticelli may have burned some of his own work at this time. Let's return to the mystic nativity. I'm going to divide it into two sections to get a better sense of its meaning. But before that, I'd like you to take another moment to gather it all in and make note of anything that grabs your attention. Let me now focus on the top half of the painting. We have swirling angels and a Greek inscription. That may have caught your attention. Once we know the meaning of this inscription, things truly get weird. It translates as, "This painting, at the end of the year 1500, in the troubles of Italy, I, Alessandro, in the half time after the time, painted, according to the 11th chapter of St. John," that's a reference to the book of Revelation, "in the second woe of the apocalypse, during the release of the devil for 3.5 years. Then he shall be bound in the 12th chapter, and we shall see him buried," as in this picture. Well, that doesn't sound very Christmassy. Well, what is Botticelli referring to? Well, it's based on a sermon text preached by Savonarola and a reference to the widespread belief in much of Renaissance Europe that the year 1500 would usher in the end time, the apocalypse. Now, moving down, the angels on the roof represent faith, hope, and charity. They're dressed in the corresponding white, red, and green robes. And the 12 dancing angels at the top hold olive branches from which ribbons with inscriptions are suspended. From the ribbons hang golden crowns. Can you notice the faint writing on those ribbons? Maybe if you squint a little bit. Well, infrared reflectography has revealed that these ribbons originally bore the 12 virtues of the Virgin Mary, derived from the sermon by Savonarola. Some of the inscriptions about Mary include Mother of God, Bride of God, Sole Queen of the World, Sanctuary Beyond Words, Virgin of Virgins, Wondrous Bride of God the Father, Virgin Mother, Hope of Sinners. I often ask myself, are Protestants missing out on veneration of the archetypal feminine represented in figures like Mary, the mother of Jesus, and Mary Magdalene? Are we missing out? Well, in the bottom half of the work, we see the central figures of Mary, Joseph, and the Christ child, along with the wise men on the left and the shepherds on the right. Notice how oversized the baby and Mary are. Let's zoom in even further. I don't think anyone in this world besides Mary would have the strength to lift up that baby Jesus. He's rotund for a baby. And Mary herself barely fits under the enclosure. Both are outsized for the setting. So Botticelli is not being realistic. He's telling us that these two are the most significant in the painting. Now, Joseph is in an odd posture. He looks like he might be asleep. I'm going to discuss these three, the Holy Family, more during a future presentation. But for now, I think it's clear that this is not the same Botticelli who painted the Primavera and the birth of Venus. Now let's zoom back out. Notice the angels and how they are interacting with the other characters. The angels have placed olive wreaths on the heads of the wise men, on the heads of the shepherds, and the men they embrace at the bottom. Now, olive branches are a traditional symbol of peace, and their use throughout the painting, particularly as wreaths, emphasizes the central theme of peace on earth and the reconciliation between celestial and earthly beings. In other words, the end of our spiritual alienation. Zooming in on those three characters at the bottom, they look like they're wrestling with angels, but they're actually embracing one another. And the scrolls that are attached to those angels proclaim in Latin, peace on earth to men of goodwill. What are these angels doing with these men? Well, they're actually pulling them out of a state of religious limbo. They are saving them from demons who are now scurrying back underground. The overall message of this work emphasizes the coming of Christ and the hope that this event and his return during the end times will bring an era of peace. So Botticelli has presented two nativity stories: the birth of Jesus into the world and his rebirth into the world during the apocalyptic end times. Now, there were other paintings of the Nativity in Florence during Botticelli's day that he would have known about and that may have influenced his own depiction. And I would like to present two of them for comparison. One of them is this triptych, which you can see in the Botticelli rooms at the Uffizi, just around the corner from the birth of Venus and Primavera. Let's get another angle, a straight-on angle of it. It's known as the Portinari altarpiece by Flemish artist Hugo van der Goes. This nativity does not include the Magi, only the shepherds. Now, even though this work is by a Flemish artist, it was commissioned for display at the hospital of Santa Maria Nuova in Florence. So Botticelli would have had access to it and certainly saw it before painting his own nativity. We focus in on that central panel. We'll see that unlike in the mystic nativity, everyone in this work is painted to scale. And Jesus is not the rotund baby in Botticelli's work, but a skinny toddler. Also, the characters are depicted in finer detail than in the mystic nativity. Now, I'd like to focus on those shepherds in the right corner. They're going to help us wrap things up today. Now, I know for you Advent purists, the shepherds are typically discussed on the third day, Sunday of Advent. Well, in the spirit of Art Brunch, I'm taking some artistic license with Advent. Today is the Advent day stressing hope. The shepherds are going to help us explore the idea of hope for us personally. Notice how Van der Goes has depicted them. He has really emphasized the fact that shepherds represent a humble class of people. Let's focus in on one of them, the one on the far right. Obviously, his family couldn't afford orthodontic treatment, nor regular visits to the dentist. The point is that the good news is for everyone, including the lowest class in society. And behind his shoulder, we see the moment when an angel visits the shepherds to tell them about this wondrous birth of their future deliverer, the one who would bring peace. In their fear, a message of hope, a vision of hope. Now, here is another painting Botticelli certainly saw frequently in Florence. A nativity scene by Domenico Ghirlandaio. Again, I'd like to focus on the shepherds on the right. Now, Ghirlandaio also has presented them in wonderful detail compared to Mystic Nativity, but he's also cleaned up their appearance compared to Van der Gogh's. At least he's been kind enough not to reveal their teeth. Let's be honest. The shepherds, as far as agents in the world, are more like us. They're just regular folks without a lot of power and influence. Now let's compare them to Botticelli's shepherds. Botticelli seems to have split the difference between Ghirlandaio's shepherds and Van der Gogh's. Botticelli's shepherds are rendered simplistically in a less polished way, their shoeless feet the only witness to their poverty and humble status. Let me ask you this. When in your life have you been like a shepherd? When have you been humbled? Where in your life do you feel you lack power, agency? Where in your life do you feel less than capable? I know retirement from work often brings such feelings, and some of you are retired. I'd like to invite all of us now to wake up our imagination, to become as powerful in our imaginations as we were when very young. I'd like us to become one of these shepherds. Notice the comforting presence of the angel who crowns the shepherd with an olive wreath. Do any of you believe in transcendent helpers? Angels? A divine twin? Or some other type of celestial partner? Any of you believe in that? Well, whether you believe in them or not, I would like you to imagine now that you do have helpers, spirit guides who are there to offer comfort and hope and even clarity. I think it's obvious that we are living in a time where fear is ubiquitous. We need a little hope. We need a little help, don't we? We need to know that we are not alone in dealing with life, its challenges, and its threats. So before opening it up to Q&A, I'd like for you to just take a moment and really revive that imagination that was so strong when you were young. And imagine yourself as those shepherds in this scene, with an angel comforting you by your side, supporting you, helping you to understand. Now, if you were to attend the in-person gathering at Fergus Congregational Church here in Boulder at 11:45, I would take you at this time through a specific exercise from the Catholic tradition. It's called the nation contemplation. It's a little bit more detailed, but it would have taken us through this in a measured way. But I hope you got some um, extra experience from using your imagination, becoming one of those shepherds. In the future, we're going to become different characters in this work. But I hope you found this helpful. And I'd like you to continue to use this as a contemplative exercise during the week. All right. If anybody is brave enough to share some of their experience, any thoughts, ideas that came to mind when you were doing your imaginative exercise, or even questions that came to mind, please share them now. Don't be shy at all. The floor is now open.